Welcome to Whispers at Night. Can't sleep? Curl up and listen. I'll share quiet, eerie stories while the rain falls out into your window. Subscribe. Join our little night crew and hit like if you enjoy the chill. Ready? Let's begin. I grew up in a busy part of Pennsylvania. When I finally had enough money to move out, I went the other way, straight into the mountains. Same state, different world. After a year of permits and paperwork, I bought a small place tucked deep in the Appalachians. It wasn't fancy, but it fit me. Water from a well, a wide porch, trees for neighbors. My brother stayed in the city. When he had kids, I became the mountain uncle. He never loved that. Not because he hated nature, but because the stories about these hills bothered him. The old talk about people who vanish, voices in the timber, lights where no houses are. I told him it was just talk. For 9 years, I had no reason to doubt that. One summer, he brought the boys for a long weekend. I was glad. When they came, the house felt alive. We grilled. We skipped stones in the creek. We stayed up late telling easy stories on the porch. There are 2 things you should know before I tell you what happened that last night. First, this region runs on old stories. You hear them in hardware stores and at church suppers, warnings wrapped in jokes. Second, my younger nephew was 5 and had an imaginary friend phase. He'd talk to thin air, then run off laughing. I figured it was normal, and mostly it was. Until it wasn't. It was a hot, still night. The kind where the porch boards hold the day's heat and the air doesn't move. We were tossing a ball back and forth when the little one asked, "Can Juliana play too?" The name hit me like a cold drop of rain. I'd never heard it. I asked who Juliana was. He said, very matter of fact, "She lives in the mountains. I met her last night in the yard. She said she wants to play, but I had to ask you first." Then he smiled like this was nothing at all. I looked at his older brother. He shrugged. He didn't know the name either. I kept it light. "Sure," I said. "If Juliana wants to join, she can." We kept playing. Every few minutes I asked if she'd showed up yet. "Not yet," he said each time. Then he said we should go into the trees to call for her, because maybe she couldn't see the porch. That was the first time the cold rolled over me. Can't explain it except to say my body knew before my brain did. I've learned to listen to that feeling out here. The forest has rules. One of mine is simple. Don't go into the woods at night. I broke it once years ago and the dark felt wrong, like I'd stepped into a room where I wasn't welcome. "We'll stay here," I told him. "If Juliana wants to play, she can come to us." He pouted, but it was late anyway. I herded them inside, locked the back door, and waited while they fought sleep. Before I left the room, I told the older boy I was going to lock the bedroom door from the outside, and that he should only open up for me. I don't know why I said that. It just came out. He nodded, serious as a soldier. It was too early for me to sleep. I made tea, took a book out to the back porch, and sank into the old chair that looks at the tree line. For a while, it was the usual night noises, bugs steady like a soft engine. Then the forest went quiet in a way that wasn't normal. Not less noise, no noise. Even the leaves seemed to hold their breath. From the dark timber came a sound that did not belong. A child humming, not a tune I knew. Just a rise and fall, soft and careful, like it didn't want to scare anything. In a city, a child humming at night is nothing. Out here, miles from anyone, it made the hair stand up on my neck. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded too loud, like I'd broken something. The humming stopped. I stood squinting into the black between the trunks. That's when I saw her, far back where the flashlight beams don't reach. A small shape crouched over something on the ground. From the way she moved, she had to be a little girl. I had 2 thoughts at once. 1, no child should be out here in the dark. 2, this is wrong. I locked the porch door behind me and started toward her with my phone in my hand. As soon as she saw me, she darted into the trees. I jogged after her, calling, "It's okay, I can help." "Are your parents close?" I punched 911 with my thumb without taking my eyes off the dark. The dispatcher asked for my location. I gave her the road and the house number, then the rough direction I'd gone from the porch. The girl flashed white in my light, then slipped sideways and vanished between 2 rocks. There was a narrow gap there, wide enough for a small body, not for mine. I crouched by the opening and talked, steady as I could. "You're safe. I won't hurt you." Come back with me and we'll call your folks." On the phone, the dispatcher kept me talking. She said officers were close. She asked me to stay on the line. I did. I knelt there longer than I can measure. The breathing in that crack was shallow and fast, or maybe it was the wind. It felt like a coin balanced on its edge. Then the dispatcher said, "Officers are at your house. Sir, your back door is open. Looks like a break-in." My mind went blank except for the boys. I ran. I didn't think about the rocks or the roots or the branches that slapped my face. I just ran until the porch came up like a ship out of fog. The back door I had locked was splintered. Inside looked like a wild storm had blown through. Mud smeared across the floor in thick arcs, clods on the stairs, streaks up the hall. But there had been no rain. The walls were scratched from waist height down, scores and gouges the way a big animal marks a tree. The worst of it was the bedroom door, deep cuts around the latch. The wood bowed. Another few hits and it would have given. 2 officers met me in the hall, hands up to slow me down. I was shouting the boys' names without meaning to. We got the last bolt off and swung the door. The kids were curled together in the corner, pale, shaking. The older one would not let go of his brother. The younger's face was blotchy from crying. He kept whispering, "She couldn't come in. She couldn't come in." I told myself it was a bear. It had to be a bear. That's the only thing that makes sense in a story you can tell to other people. The officers called in a wildlife specialist. He knelt by the door, touched the grooves, walked the mud, sniffed the air like a dog, and stood. He didn't say the word bear. He said, "Not that. Not any I know." A search team went to the rocks where I'd seen the girl slip away. They swept with lights, checked for prints, looked for fabric caught on bark. Nothing, no footprints, small or large. No sign a child had ever been there. I keep turning it over. The call from the trees, the little figure, the way she ran the second she knew I'd seen her. The door torn almost off the hinges while I was gone. The boys, safe by inches behind a lock I almost didn't set. I don't know what came to my house that night. I don't know what the humming was or who taught my nephew that name. I only know this. Something used a child to draw me away, and the thing that wanted in did not want me. It wanted the children. I'm not telling you to be scared of the mountains. I still love them. But respect goes both ways. If the forest tells you to stay on the porch, stay on the porch. If the night goes quiet all at once, listen. And if a sweet voice from the dark asks for your permission, remember who is doing the asking and who is really asking for whom. I'm telling this because people forget, and because I don't want anyone else to ignore that small voice that says, "Don't." The case was everywhere once. I won't drag those families through it again. No real names, no exact place. But what happened is what I lived. It was the summer of 2000. I wasn't great at making friends back then. Quiet comes off as rude if you don't know someone. College changed that a little. I met Maya. Loud laugh, easy smile, and somehow she folded me into her circle. It felt like being invited through a door I'd pressed my face against for years. There was one person in that group who never sat right with me. Call him Colin. He never did anything to me. He never even raised his voice. But he was the cold patch in a warm room. I told myself I was being unfair. That summer we rented a cabin in the Smokies and planned to hop onto a well-known stretch of the Appalachian Trail. Theo, the organizer, had the week mapped down to snacks. We'd do a big hike that meant camping out on night 3. I'd never slept outside. I said yes anyway. The drive up felt like one of those rare good days you remember in color. Windows down, bad singing, everyone teasing each other. Even Colin seemed lighter. I wondered if I'd judged him wrong. On the second day, my stomach turned on me. Light fever, aches, that hollow feeling. Nothing dramatic. Just enough that we agreed I should stay at the cabin while they did the overnight hike. Maya argued. She hated leaving me. I waved her off. "I'll nap and be fine. Go." That's when Colin said he'd stay too. "I'm not feeling great either. Don't want to slow everyone down." He smiled a little and something in my ribs tightened. I buried it. I didn't want to be the reason for drama. He'd never hurt me. People smile. It's fine. It's fine. The day was uneventful in that stiff, polite way. We ate. We watched something dumb on a tiny TV. When dusk fell and I felt worse, I told him goodnight. He gave me that small smile again. I had never locked the bedroom door in that cabin. That night my hand moved before my head decided. The bolt slid over with a soft click I felt in my teeth. Sometime after midnight, close enough to the middle of the night that the world felt emptied out, he knocked. Not hard, a cautious tap. "Hey," he said through the wood, voice casual. "You got a painkiller? I've got a headache." "First aid kit's in the kitchen," I said, trying to keep my tone even. I heard him breathe. Then, "Thanks." Footsteps away, I lay there staring at the dark. My skin wouldn't settle. The cheap clock ticked like it was under my pillow. He came back later. How much later I couldn't tell, and knocked again. "Didn't help," he said. "Can I get another one from you?" "You shouldn't double up that soon," I said. "Give it time." "There's tea." Silence on the other side, not long. Enough to feel him standing there, listening to how I sounded. The next thing out of his mouth wasn't casual. "Open the door," he said flat. I need it. Something in me snapped into place. Not panic, not even fear, just certainty. He wanted me to open the door. That was the whole point of the conversation. If he'd really needed help, the kitchen was 20 steps away. The others had taken the car. We were hours from town. If he broke the door, there would be no one here to stop him. I slid my shoes on, grabbed my jacket and the few things that mattered, and eased the window up. The screen squealed like it wanted to give me away. I eased it free and dropped to the ground. Pine needles softened the landing. I didn't look back. I ran until the cabin light was a suggestion behind the trees, and kept going until the trees were nothing but dark spaces between darker spaces. I found a shallow, rock-rimmed dip and crawled into it. I pressed my cheek to dirt. Every sound was catastrophic. A branch shift became a step. The wind became a breath. The forest's own settling sounded like someone choosing where to place a foot. I thought about staying still until morning and then changed my mind and did exactly that. Because moving in circles in the dark gets you nowhere. Gray seeped into the woods. I started walking. I chose a way and kept it. I knew the group would return that day. When Maya saw my empty room and the window, she'd call for help. 2 days blurred. I rationed what I had. Water tasted like metal from a creek. A granola bar became a meal. Near sundown on the second day, I heard a human voice. "A rescue team." I cried so hard my throat hurt. At the hospital, they said food poisoning, probably. Plenty of time to recover, they said. Then the detectives came. I told them everything. That's when my blood went cold. Colin was gone. My friends had hiked back to a cabin that looked different. The living room, the couch, the TV, the fireplace. All of it was draped in plastic sheeting, taped clean to the baseboards. Like a renovation that never started, or something else. Search teams combed those mountains for weeks. Dogs, helicopters, nothing. No footprints worth anything, no car caught on a camera any of us knew about. He simply left the story. I moved states. I went back to school somewhere new. I worked. I answered numbers I recognized and let the rest ring. My life got small on purpose. I lost touch with everyone from that trip, even Maya, which is a kind of grief I don't have neat words for. I don't camp. I don't hike. If a door can lock, it does. When people tell me he seems nice, I nod and let time decide. If there's a lesson anyone can use, it's this. Your gut isn't a court of law. It won't present exhibits. It won't cross-examine. It will just tap you on the shoulder, soft at first and then harder, and ask you to choose yourself over the risk of looking rude. Choose yourself. Lock the door. Say no, wake someone up. Leave if you can. You don't owe anyone the benefit of the doubt when your bones are ringing with warning. I wish I'd listened sooner. I'm grateful I listened when I did. It was 2002. I was in my early 20s and hungry for any excuse to get outside. I loved hiking. The quiet, the space to think, the little jolt of fear you feel when the trees close in. So when Michael said we should try a trail in the Appalachian Mountains, I said yes without a second thought. It would be the four of us, Michael, me, David, and Richard. Just a day hike, we said. If it felt good, we'd come back for a full weekend. People in our area told stories about that trail. Old warnings, missing hikers, strange things seen at dusk. We laughed them off. When you're young, you feel untouchable. We left before dawn and reached the trailhead at sunrise. The sky was dark and heavy. The air felt wet and close, We tightened our packs, checked the map, and started walking. The first miles were easy. Flat ground, a clear path, nothing tricky. Then the woods thickened. The light faded even though it was still morning. Branches knitted over our heads. Our voices sounded small. I realized what felt wrong. There were no birds. No chipmunks. No far-off woodpecker. It wasn't normal silence. It was like the forest had emptied out. We were talking about how weird it felt when David stumbled. He had caught his foot on a rope stretched low across the trail. Not a vine, a rope. It looked old and frayed, like some kind of trap someone had set years ago. Hunting was banned up there, but we all knew people who ignored the rules. We told ourselves it was leftover junk from a long time back. David sat down and rubbed his ankle. It wasn't broken, but it puffed up fast. Our plan to finish before dark was done. While we stood there arguing about what to do, I felt that prickly feeling on the back of my neck. I looked up and scanned the trees. A face was staring at us from way off. Dark paint smeared across the cheeks, long hair tied back, eyes fixed and cold. He did not hide when I saw him. He didn't look away. I took a step and he vanished behind the trunk. Michael whispered that there was another one on the other side of the trail, also watching. We'd heard talk about people living back in those hills off the grid. The rule was simple: respect them and they'll respect you. But being watched like that set my nerves on fire. We decided to turn back and head for a marked shelter on the map. If we could rest there, maybe David's ankle would calm down and we could make it out by daylight. By late afternoon we found the shelter, a three-sided roofed lean-to and a fire ring. There was already a man inside, crouched by a small fire, sharpening knives. He looked up slowly. Something in his face bothered me right away. His eyes were empty and mean. If someone had told me he was dangerous, I would have believed it on the spot. We asked if we could share the shelter till morning. He stared at each of us, taking his time, then nodded once. We sat by the fire. At first he said nothing. Then he started to talk. His voice was flat and hard. He ranted about trash in the woods. Said they didn't belong. Said they deserved to die. The words came out like poison. We all shifted and he noticed. He changed the subject, told a story about hunting with his father when he was a kid. How he'd spent long stretches up here. How he knew every cut of the land. The story sounded like a cover for something else. I said I was going to sleep. The others followed. We laid out our bags, but none of us really slept. We decided to take turns keeping watch. The woods were too quiet, and twice I felt eyes on us from beyond the firelight. Sometime toward the middle of the night, there was a boom in the distance. Not thunder. An explosion, dull and heavy, rolling through the trees. The man stood up fast. He smiled, a slow, terrible smile, and said not to worry, that he was finally going to take care of them. In that moment, I knew. He wasn't talking about deer. He was hunting people. My stomach turned. I told the others we needed to go, now. No one argued. We stuffed our gear into our packs and headed back down the trail as quickly as David could hobble. The night air felt colder. The trees seemed to lean closer. Then far off, a woman screamed. The sound was so sharp and desperate it cut through my chest. I can still hear it if I let myself. We hadn't gone 5 minutes when shapes stepped out from the trees and surrounded us. 10, maybe 12 people. Thin like clothes even in the cold. They looked scared but ready to fight. Michael lifted his hands and spoke first, saying we didn't want trouble. A man pushed through the circle. His voice had a rough mountain sound. He asked what we had done to their families. He said people had been taken one by one every few nights. They never came back. They knew someone was hunting them, but they didn't know who. I told him everything. About the shelter, the man by the fire, the knives, the ranting, the explosion. I said we respected them and we were leaving. He stared at me for a long time like he was trying to see if I was lying. Then he stepped aside and the others opened a path. We walked through, heads down, hearts banging in our ears. No one followed. Adrenaline carried us the rest of the way. Even with his bad ankle, David was almost running. The trail felt longer in the dark, but the map was simple enough, and we hit the parking lot before dawn. We climbed into the car, locked the doors, and just sat, shaking and breathing. When the sun finally rose, we drove into town and went straight to the police. We told them everything. The rope on the trail, the watchers in the trees, the man at the shelter and his words, the explosion, the scream. I described the man as plainly as I could. Face, age, build, voice. The officer kept his features still, but I had the strong feeling he knew exactly who I was talking about. He took our statements. He said they would look into it. That was it. After that day, I checked the news, searched old forums, asked a couple of quiet questions when I ran into a ranger. Nothing ever came back to me. No arrest, no report. Maybe they tried and couldn't prove anything. Maybe the people deep in those hills handled it themselves. Or maybe it kept on like it had, out of sight and off the record. I still think about that night. The rope stretched low across the path, the painted face that didn't blink, the man by the fire turning his knife in the light. I remember how the woods felt wrong, how the silence wasn't empty at all, how it pressed against us like a hand over a mouth. On the drive home, we barely spoke. We talked about coffee and gas and where to hose mud off our boots. The real thing sat between us like a fifth person. I hike less now. When I do, I stick to busy trails and early mornings. If the forest goes quiet in that strange way, I listen. If my gut tightens, I don't argue with it. I turn around while the way back is still clear. We were lucky that night. Luck can feel like skill, but it isn't. We were spared, and I don't forget it. This happened in the late summer of 2007. I lived in Charlemont, a small town on the Mohawk Trail in the Berkshires of western Massachusetts. The hills there feel endless, dark woods, steep dirt roads, long gaps with no houses. It's not the Appalachian Trail, but it has the same kind of lonely, heavy forest that swallows sounds. I wasn't an outdoors kid. Maybe that's why I was drawn to Harper, a girl from school who lived in a wooden cabin up a ridge road past the river. She grew up with the woods the way I grew up with TV and traffic. She made the forest sound alive. By senior year, my parents had loosened up. I also had a babysitting job, which gave me an excuse to be out late. When Harper invited a few of us over while her parents were away, I told my folks I had a babysitting shift, then went to meet Maya, who was driving. We met at a gas station off Route 2. The second I got there, I knew something was wrong. Maya stood by her car, tense. An old pickup idled nearby. Two men leaned on it, dirty and smug, tossing lines like they were charming. "Where you girls headed? Need company?" As soon as Maya saw me, she got in the car. I got in too. She locked the doors and pulled out. We called them creeps and tried to shake it off. By the time the road turned to gravel and the trees pressed close, we were trying to laugh again. Harper's cabin sat in a small clearing, warm light at the windows. Big porch, old boards. It felt cozy. Inside were the other girls and the mess of a normal sleepover. Bags, snacks, music too loud for the hour. For a while, it was easy to forget the men at the station. Tessa went to the bathroom and came back pale. She said someone was peeking in a window. Harper rolled her eyes. "Out here? It was probably a deer, or you spooked yourself." But Tessa didn't look like she was kidding. I told them about the two men. Maya didn't wait. She picked up her phone and called the police. "We're not going to be stupid about this," she said. That choice matters. A few minutes later, the lights cut out. Not a flicker, everything died at once. Then a crash from the back of the house. We ran to pull blinds and shove latches. Glass broke somewhere else. Voices drifted in, low, sing-song, mocking. One of them shouted something filthy. It was the same tone as the guy at the station. Harper didn't waste time. Basement now. Her dad kept wine down there. The room had been reinforced the year before and had a heavy door with a lock. We scrambled down the stairs, slipped inside, and turned the lock. The room was small, cool, and smelled like wood and dust. We pressed our backs to the shelves and tried not to breathe. Upstairs, the men moved through the rooms like they owned them. Drawers yanked. Chairs kicked. Their steps had a heavy rhythm. Their laughter had that ugly delight of scaring someone. The basement door creaked. Footsteps on the stairs. A hand brushed our door. Tessa made a small sound before she could stop it. The men went quiet, listening. Then a soft chuckle. Time got strange. We sat in the dark with our knees touching, hands shaking. The pounding started. Hard hits that shuddered the racks and made the bottles ring. Dust sifted down. They spat insults through the door, each worse than the last, as if the words could pry us open. There was no second exit, no window. Just the lock and our luck. Then far off, a siren. Thin at first, then closer. It was the sweetest sound I've ever heard, and still scary, because it meant the men heard it too. One of them cursed. The other said in a calm voice that he'd find us one by one. Their steps turned fast. Something crashed. Silence stretched. Then their footsteps pulled away. The house went still. We waited until the siren washed the walls. When we unlocked the door, my legs shook so hard I had to hold the shelf. The living room was wrecked. Sofas flipped. Lamps smashed. Drawers dumped. Glass across the floor like ice. The front door hung open to the night. The police came in careful and quick. Cleared rooms, checked the yard, and asked short questions we answered in short bursts. Harper's parents drove back the same night. They didn't stay there for a while after that. The officers took our statements and dusted a few things, but they didn't catch anyone. The case faded the way small-town cases do when there's no name and no face. The part that stuck with me most was that voice at the end, through the door. "I'll find you one by one." Not a shout. A promise. Life moved on. My friends scattered to other towns and states. I stayed. I still buy coffee at that same station on the Mohawk Trail. I still drive past the turn that leads up to Harper's old road. I keep my phone charged. I close my blinds at dusk. I avoid basements when I can. I know in my bones those men weren't local. They felt like the kind who ride the edges looking for the easy door. Sometimes on quiet nights, when the fridge hum stops and the house settles, I hear the thud of fists on a heavy door. I feel the floor tremble. I smell cool wood and dust, and I see the small choices that mattered. Maya calling right away, Harper knowing the safest room. All of us moving when she said move. People say nothing happens in hill towns. A lot happens. It just doesn't always get solved. The woods here hold sound like a church. Footsteps, whispers, sirens, the breath you hold because you're afraid to make a noise. I live with all of that. I also live with one clear rule I'd share with anyone. If your gut says something is wrong, treat it like a fact. Don't argue with it. Don't be polite to fear. Lock the door. Make the call. And if you're lucky, you'll hear that siren too. I've hiked since I was a kid, but it turned into something different after my cousin died. He wasn't just family. He was the one who got me into this. He taught me how to read a map, how to watch the weather, how to leave a place cleaner than I found it. When he passed, hiking felt like the only way I could still walk beside him. So I planned a quiet trip in the Appalachian Mountains, away from the busy trails, just me and the trees and the space to think. It was late fall. The air felt washed and sharp. I parked at a small gravel pull-off at the end of a county road. Only one other vehicle sat there. An old, beaten-up truck with mud baked hard on the tires. It looked like it hadn't moved in days. I didn't think much of it. I like it when the lot is empty. I like the quiet. I shut my phone off after seeing there was no service anyway, shouldered my pack, and started in. The trail was narrow and a little wild. Brambles clawed at my pants. The canopy pressed close and let in thin strips of sunlight. I stopped here and there to sip water and take pictures. Patches of fern. A rotted log torn open by some animal. A swirl of leaves in a cold stream. It was calm. I told myself this was the point, to hear my own footsteps and nothing else. After a couple of hours, the path started to climb, slow and steady, switching up a ridge. That was when the feeling started. Not fear exactly, just a prickle, like a draft at the back of your neck. I kept walking. A lot of hikers know that feeling. It comes and goes. You learn not to jump at every noise or you'll never leave your car. But the feeling didn't leave. Every so often I heard a soft crunch behind me, then nothing when I stopped. It happened again and again. I told myself it was a deer. Plenty of deer move like that. They follow at a distance, curious, then freeze when you turn. I kept going, but I began to pay attention. Not to the noise itself, but to the rhythm. Animals move with a certain loose sound. Whatever was behind me felt more careful, not smooth, not wild. Near the shoulder of the ridge, I noticed a faint break in the green. A side path I wouldn't have seen if the sun hadn't slid out at that moment. It wasn't a real trail, just plants pushed aside. I should have stayed on the main line, but I stepped off to look. That was a mistake. The trees opened into a small, flattened spot that had the shape of a camp, not a family campsite. No tent poles, no folding chairs, no cooler, no soda cans. This place was rough and tight. A tarp between two trees, a ring of stones packed in, logs set low like stools. Someone had cut small branches and sharpened the tips. A plastic bin sat under the tarp. I lifted the lid, looked inside, and felt my stomach turn. There were knives. A length of braided rope, a lock. At the bottom sat a single handcuff attached to a short chain. I dropped the lid. I didn't touch anything else. The whole spot felt wrong. Not because it was dirty or wild, but because it was careful. Whoever made it had done this before. I backed out of the clearing and turned toward the main trail. That was when I heard voices. Too soft to catch words, but the sound was people, not wind. A branch clicked against another. Steps came from more than one direction. I moved fast, placing my feet to avoid noise, but dry leaves talk no matter how gentle you are. The steps behind me answered. Now quicker, now slow. I didn't run. Running blind in the woods gets you hurt. I breathed slow and pulled my phone from my pocket. Even with no cell service, the GPS dot still showed. The map on the screen was simple. If I looped across the slope, I could meet the main trail again without going back past the side path. I set my line in my head, put the phone away to save battery, and cut across the hill. The woods felt tighter as the light moved. Every flicker at the corner of my eye looked like a person stepping behind a trunk. I tripped on roots twice and caught myself with my palms. The voices grew clearer now, low, not rushed. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to give away that I could hear them, and some stubborn part of me didn't want faces. Faces are hard to forget. When I pushed through a stand of young hemlocks and saw the pale streak of the main trail ahead, relief washed over me so hard I had to stop and breathe. I stepped onto the packed dirt and looked right and left. No one. The forest held its breath. I started toward the pull-off. A figure appeared far ahead. For a flash, I thought it was one of them. Then I saw the hat, the uniform, the patch on the sleeve. A ranger. I felt my knees loosen. I waved and walked faster, almost calling out, but the sound stuck in my chest. He lifted his hand back in a small, calm way, like he didn't want to startle me. When we met, I told him I'd found a camp that didn't look like a normal camp. I told him about the bin and what I saw inside, and that people were in the trees behind me. My words came out thin and fast. He didn't doubt me. He didn't smile. He asked a few short questions: where, how far, which side. Then he pressed his radio and called for help. "Stay on the trail," he said. "Keep moving. Don't stop at the first pull-off if you're alone. I'll be behind you." His voice wasn't soft or hard. It was practical. He walked with me at a small distance, giving space but not letting me out of sight. When the lot came into view, I hurried the last stretch. The old truck I'd seen that morning was gone now. My car sat by itself, a small, helpless-looking thing under the trees. I reached for the handle before I noticed the tires. All four were flat. Not a slow leak, slashed. The cuts were clean and deep. The car sat slumped like a wounded animal. That was when fear turned heavy. A camp like that didn't belong on public land. The voices had followed me with purpose. Now the truck was gone and my car was crippled. These weren't random things. They were steps in a plan. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there breathing hard. The ranger came up on my right, kept his gaze on the tree line, and spoke into the radio again. He told me to stay put. He didn't fumble for words or fill the air with guesses. He just watched the woods like he had practice. Time stretched. The light settled into late afternoon. I remember the sound the wind made in the dry leaves, and how every small noise felt like it came from right beside the car. A second ranger truck rolled in at evening. The men spoke quiet. One stood by my door, the other drove the lot, slow, scanning the ditches and the edge of the trees. A tow truck arrived after that. They waved me out, kept me between them, and helped load the car. When the driver asked where to take it, the ranger gave the name of a shop down in the valley and said he'd follow. I didn't relax when we hit pavement. I didn't relax when we passed the first mailbox or when phone bars popped up on my screen. Every time a pickup appeared in the mirror, I tensed. At the shop, the mechanic whistled when he saw the tires. He didn't make a joke. He just got to work. The ranger wrote a short report and gave me a card. He told me someone would come by to talk if I wanted to file anything more formal. He also said this: if your gut talks to you up there, listen to it. Don't bargain with it. I went home that night. I slept a little, then woke with a jolt like I'd been falling. In the morning, I could still smell the tarp and the cold ash. and that dark, wet leaf smell you get near a camp that hasn't been used for long. My hands shook when I made coffee. When I closed my eyes, I saw tree trunks as tall as buildings, and a thin path bending away, and a plastic bin under a canvas sheet. For a few days, I kept thinking about the old truck. Who owned it? How long it had sat? Whether the driver had watched me step onto the trail and taken note. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the owner was a hunter who'd moved his camp deeper, or someone who came out at night and slept during the day. But the camp I found didn't feel like hunting. The tools inside weren't for deer, and the cuts on my tires weren't a warning. They were meant to hold me there. Since that day, I only hike familiar places and I keep to mornings. I tell people where I'm going, and I tell them a time to expect me back. I keep a small tire kit in the trunk and a bigger flashlight in my pack. I don't step down side paths, even when they call to my curiosity. I don't let pride argue with common sense. I miss the long, empty trails. I miss the days when the quiet felt like a gift and not a trick. Maybe I'll get that back someday. Maybe not. Grief changes you, and fear changes you too. I still love the mountains. I still love the sound of a stream in a green hollow, and the way fog lifts off a ridge after sunrise. But I also know there are people who use that quiet for their own plans, and they count on us not listening to the small voice that says turn around. Sometimes I lie awake and hear leaves move in my head. I see a figure melting between trunks, not rushing, not careless, just sure. I see a ranger's hand lift once in a calm hello. I see 4 black tires slumped into the gravel like 4 flat lungs. I remind myself of the simple things that kept me safe. Noticing when the forest went too still. Trusting my gut when the side trail felt wrong, staying on the main line. Asking for help the second I saw it. I still carry my cousin with me. When I'm brave enough to go back out, I'll hear his voice the way I did when we were young. Steady, patient, telling me to read the land, to be humble, to respect every living thing, and also respect the feeling that keeps you alive. The mountains are beautiful. They don't promise to be kind. I've lived my whole life on the edge of the Appalachians, in Helen, Georgia. The mountains are our backdrop. Pretty from town, dark and endless once you leave the roads. Since I was a kid, I heard the same whispers. Hikers who never came back. Hunters who went a little too far. Tourists who thought a scenic loop was just a loop. Folks would lower their voices, say it wasn't a news kind of thing, just mountains taking what they want. A year ago, I started keeping notes, missing posters, forum posts, spots where search teams found nothing. Little pins on a map began to cluster in one patch of forest, a tangle of steep hollows and old logging cuts. It wasn't one of the famous trails. It was the place everyone avoided without saying why. I talked 4 buddies into going with me. We all grew up out here. We know the signs of weather, how a ridge funnels wind, how a creek can turn on you after a storm. It wasn't a thrill-seeker's trip. We planned it like a job. 2 first aid kits, headlamps, knives, a sat phone, a handheld radio, and 2 pistols locked and stowed. We left town just after sunrise, the kind of cool morning where your breath hangs like smoke, and parked at a pull-off nobody uses anymore. At first, it was easy going. We joked, stepped over roots, pointed out old blaze marks on trees. The deeper we got, the quieter it felt. Not peaceful, hollow. Even the bugs seemed to hold their breath. Around late morning, the path we were on thinned to deer tracks and then to nothing. We pushed another half mile and came into a little shelf of ground that didn't match the map. That's where we saw it. The cabin was small, rough, like someone built it with what they had and didn't care if it was pretty. Tin roof patched in places. A door that hung a bit crooked. No smoke from the chimney. We'd seen a few hunting shacks over the years, so we started to angle away, give it space. Mark said something too loud to Dennis, and from inside the cabin a voice called out, "Help! Please, help!" We all froze. It was muffled, scared. It came again, faster and higher. My mouth went dry. We moved toward the porch as a group, not running, not slow. I put my hand up, wait. And that's when 2 men stepped from behind the cabin. They were hard to miss. Clothes stained and old, faces burned in by sun and time. Their eyes looked wrong, like they saw through us. Both carried long guns like they'd been born with them. They didn't speak. They watched us the way dogs watch a stranger at a fence. Then one lifted his barrel and fired straight up. The sound crashed around the trees and fell back on our heads. We did not argue with that. We backed away, 1 step, 2 steps, then turned and ran. It wasn't about leaving whoever was inside. It was about not getting shot 30 miles from the nearest help. The ground fell fast and kept falling. Brush grabbed our pants. A root took my ankle and I flung a hand to a trunk to keep from going over. Somewhere behind us, feet pounded. I heard one man curse. A branch cracked like a bat. None of us looked back. We ran until the air cut our lungs. The chasing stopped, I don't know when. We slid down into a dry creek bed and stayed low. Our plan had been simple. If anything goes bad, call on the sat phone. When I reached for the pouch, Mark swore. His pack, the one with the phone, was still back at the cabin, dropped when the gunshot ripped the air. Our regular phones were dead this far in. The radio couldn't punch through the ridges. It was go on or go back. And going back meant stepping into their hands. We chose on. We followed the dry creek until it met water and turned with it. The forest felt crowded, trees growing in close as if to hear us. Every little sound made me jump. A squirrel in dead leaves, the clap of a woodpecker far off, the thrum of my own pulse in my ears. None of us spoke. Even Dennis, who never shuts up, kept his mouth locked. After what felt like forever, the creek hit a rough track, then a better one, then a road I knew by the bite of gravel under my boots. We reached town late afternoon. Mud from knees to boots, shirts stuck to our backs. We went straight to the police. We told them the whole thing, cabin scream, 2 armed men, the gunshot, the chase. We gave the best directions we could. Dennis described their faces like a sketch artist. Kyle and Joel added details I'd missed. The kind of boots, the length of the barrels, a long scar on one man's forearm. They listened, but I could see the wall go up. 5 guys in their 20s come in breathless, talking about a backwoods cabin, and a woman calling for help. The older officer nodded like a parent. "We'll send a car," I pushed. "It's not a joke," he nodded again. "We'll send a car." They did send a team. We drove behind them as far as the road allowed, then waited while they went in. The sun slipped lower, the light went gold, then thin. They were gone a long time. When they came back, their boots were dusty, their faces neutral. "We found a cabin," the sergeant said. "Owner's a seasonal guy. He uses it a couple times a year." Everything looked tidy. "No sign of anybody else." "Tidy," I said. "We heard someone inside." He lifted a shoulder. "No fresh tracks. Door was locked, no damage. No one's filed a missing person in that section this month." He didn't say we were lying. He didn't have to. He added, polite but firm, "Best to stay out of that area. Lots of posted land. Lots of trouble you don't need." We stood there like idiots in the falling light. Dennis kept shaking his head. "I heard her," he said. "So did you. We all had. The sound lives in my chest like a bruise." For the next 2 days we called. We dropped off a written report. We marked the map cleaner than we had out there. We asked a ranger we know to take a look. He said he'd try, then stopped answering texts. I don't know if he went and didn't like what he found, or if he knew better than to go. It's been 2 weeks. I can't sleep right. When I do, I wake up with my heart racing like I heard the gunshot again. I keep reaching for the sat phone that isn't in the house, padding pockets for a radio that isn't there. I drive the outskirts of town more than I should, just to see the tree lines. I've started to notice things I used to ignore. An old truck that parks overnight near the tubing pull-off. A tent you can just see on a ridge that wasn't there the day before. Nailed boards over a window on a cabin that used to be open. I know what everybody would say. Leave it alone. The mountains are big. People do what they do in the dark. If the police say there's nothing, then there's nothing. I've tried to swallow that, but every time I close my eyes, I see a door hung a little crooked and hear a voice behind it break on the word help. I see 2 men step from the shade like they'd been standing there forever. Their eyes flat as coins. Maybe the cabin looked neat when the officers got there because someone made it neat. Maybe they heard the siren on the mountain road and put things back faster than we could run. Maybe there are places out here that clean themselves the way a river wipes footprints. I don't know. I only know what we saw and what we heard, and how close the trees felt when we ran. If you hike out this way, be smart. Tell someone where you're going, and when you're due back. Take more than you think you'll need. Don't push deeper just because the map is blank. And if a cabin sits too quiet in a place that feels wrong, trust that feeling. Back away, make the call from town. Live long enough to be called paranoid. It's been 14 days. The mountains are still there at the edge of Helen. They look the same as they always have. Blue in the morning, black at night. But they don't feel the same to me. Not anymore. In November 1981, I was 24, fresh out of college and stuck. I had a degree, but no plan. I thought a solo hike might clear my head, so I mapped a 43-mile section of the Appalachian Trail that starts in South Carolina. The idea was simple. Spend 7 days alone, then meet a friend at a road crossing for food and company, and finish out the next stretch together. I'd done long hikes before. My parents weren't worried. I left the trailhead late morning, cool air, dry leaves, that clean pine smell you get after a few cold nights. The first 2 days were good in the most ordinary way. I walked, ate, slept. I watched small birds pop through rhododendron, saw a deer once, heard a creak before I saw it. My legs felt strong. My mind felt quiet for the first time in months. On the third morning, something was wrong. There was no reason for it. I had water, food, a good map, and a clear forecast. But lying in my tent, I had the heavy feeling you get before a storm. Only there was no storm. A dream flickered back at me. I was in the same tent at night, and I heard a sound just outside. In the dream, it was nothing and everything at once. I shook it off, unzipped my bag, and pushed out into the cold. While I boiled water, I glanced at the trees and saw a man standing behind one. Just a shoulder and the side of a head about 50 feet away. When I looked straight at him, he was gone. I waited. Nothing moved. On that trail, you usually say hello if you see another hiker. I didn't call out. I packed faster than usual, cinched my pack, and started walking. The watched feeling grew as the day warmed. I'd stop, and the woods were quiet. I'd start again, and I'd catch the dry crush of leaves somewhere behind me. I told myself it was a deer shadowing the trail. I told myself I was tired. The voice in my head didn't care. It kept saying go. I walked faster. Then I jogged the flats and short downhills. The trail ran the spine of a ridge. Down to my right, maybe a mile or more, a road should have been running roughly parallel. If I dropped off the ridge, I could hit that road sooner than if I stayed on the long switchbacks. It was a bad choice. On paper, steep slopes, no blazes. But my gut said leave the trail. So I left. I cut off into the trees downhill, stepping quick and light like I'd practiced, looking for the cleanest lines between roots and rocks. A few minutes later, I heard it. Not the soft scatter a deer makes, but human steps. Another step. A twig snapped. I spun around. The hill behind me was just trunks and brush and a strip of blue sky. No one. I'm not small. I look like the type you wouldn't bother. That's only looks. I've never been a fighter, and I hate the sick heat that comes with fear. Still, fear is honest. It keeps you moving. The slope pitched steeper, Laurel closing in. The steps angled with me. Sometimes they were far off. Sometimes they were close enough I could hear breath. A sound came with them now and then, low and rough like a man talking through his throat. Not words I could catch. It wasn't a cough. It wasn't a laugh. It was a sound you make when you want someone to know you're there. By late afternoon, light turned flat and gray. I still hadn't found the road. I had to stop. I chose the highest spot I could see, a little hump with a view between trees. I didn't cook. I ate crackers and drank cold water. I set my tent with shaking hands and crawled in. I kept my boots on. It started in the dark. Slow steps around the edge of my camp, not circling like a curious animal, more like someone tracing the line of a fence, checking each post. One long pass, then nothing, then another. I held my breath so hard my chest hurt. The steps came closer and stopped just beyond the tent wall. I could feel the difference between empty night and a person standing there. They didn't touch the fabric. They didn't speak. The steps moved off. Then nothing. I didn't sleep so much as go still and wait for light. At first, pale color, I packed fast and dropped lower, aiming the same way. I told myself the road had to be there. That watched feeling stayed glued to my back. I'd stop. Silence. I'd go. Steps. And sometimes that low sound like a hum trying to be a word. I was careful not to run blind. I watched for holes and deadfall. I kept a hand on a sapling when I slipped. I checked my compass and the lay of the land. Still, the mountain rolled me over its knees. Ridges forked, draws pulled me sideways. The road never came. By late day, I knew I was off by more than a little. I made camp again while I could still see. Same plan, high spot, quick tent, no stove. The dark came faster. The sounds came sooner. The steps were heavier now, as if whoever was out there wanted me to hear the weight. Twice I heard that rough voice, a murmur with edges, like talking through cloth. My hand stayed on my knife. I knew it wasn't enough if someone decided to cut into the tent. It felt like holding a key in your fist, more habit than help. By the next morning, I was done pretending I could walk this off with my pack. It was day 5. I was supposed to meet my friend in 2 days. He'd wait a while. He wouldn't know to worry yet. I was on my own. I made a choice that still makes some people frown when I tell it. I ditched my pack, tent, bag, most of my food, extra water. I kept the map and compass, a little bottle, the knife, and some snacks in my pockets. The rest was weight. I told myself speed was the only thing I had left. Once I dropped the weight, I could move. I ran the flats and the easy downs, walked hard on the climbs, cut angle whenever the slope allowed. The steps behind me faded, then came back like whoever followed had all the time in the world. This is the part that goes gray in my head. Hours slid. Sunlight turned to a dull glow and then to nothing. I remember a big poplar with a scar on its trunk. I remember a little stone wall half-eaten by moss, maybe the edge of an old field. I remember bright leaves stuck to wet bark like coins. I remember thinking I could walk straight out of my body and not notice. Sometime late on the 6th day, a hunter found me. I was sitting with my back to a tree, chest heaving, hands open on my knees. He was in orange, thank God. At first I thought he was the one who'd been following me, and I tried to get up and couldn't. He spoke softly, the way you talk to a spooked dog. He gave me water in small sips and radioed for help. I woke up in clinic bed with an IV in my arm and a salt taste in my mouth. My brain felt like it was 3 inches to the left of my skull. A ranger asked me questions, simple ones. Where did you leave the trail? Which ridge did you take? Did you see anyone's face? I told him what I could. He didn't tell me I was crazy. He said other hikers had felt the same thing in that general area. Watched, followed, hurried along by someone they never quite saw. They sent a team to look for my pack and for any sign of another person. They found my pack 2 days later, dragged under some laurel. No prints they could read. No camp nearby, no cut saplings, no cigarette butts, no candy wrapper with teeth marks. Nothing to point to a person with a name. Just the big fact I already knew. I hadn't been alone. A doctor called it dehydration, exhaustion, stress. Maybe the low voice I heard was wind in the branches. Maybe the steps were my own fear echoing back at me. That's one way to tell it. Another way is this. The woods are full of people, most of them good or just busy with their own lives. It only takes one who isn't. After I went home, I didn't hike for a long time. I'd try to fall asleep and feel fabric move near my face, the way a tent wall moves when someone stands outside it. Loud trucks on the highway sounded like footfalls in leaves. I put my pack away in a closet and closed the door. When I did go back, I changed how I do things. I stick to marked routes. I tell someone where I'm going and when I'll be back. I carry a whistle and a small beacon now, the kind that talks to the sky when phones don't. I don't leave the trail to save time, unless I can see the road I'm aiming for. I listen to the feeling that says no. I don't know what was out there with me in 1981. I don't need a name for it to know it was real. I know what it felt like to have my body warn me before my brain could catch up. I know the sound of steps that aren't mine, measured and patient, staying just out of sight. If you take anything from this, let it be simple. Trust your gut, even when you can't explain it. Turn around if something feels wrong. You don't owe the dark an apology for leaving. The trail will be there tomorrow, Your job is to make sure you are too. When we first got married, we tried living in town. It was fine, but it never felt like us. We missed tall trees, quiet nights, and the way the mountains make you breathe slower. So we found a forgotten cabin up a dirt road and said, let's fix it and make it home. It used to belong to an old hunter who went missing years back. His son sold it cheap and we took a chance. The place needed work, but we're handy. We added a little entry hall, opened the main room for a kitchen and living space, and built 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. The bathroom wasn't plumbed yet, so we still used the old bath in a shed out back. By the time this happened, we'd been living there about 4 months and were almost done. Most nights were quiet. The woods felt like a fence that kept the world away. This was in mid-July last year. We ate late. By the time we finished cleaning, the yard was black and still. My stomach hurt, so I told my wife, Mia, I was heading to the bathroom and asked her to put on the kettle. I stepped outside and walked toward the shed. Off to my right, something moved. I turned, saw nothing, and told myself it was a rabbit. I went in and pulled the door shut. The old knob didn't lock. Less than a minute later, footsteps moved across the dirt toward me. Slow, coming straight to the door. Instinct made me grab the knob. I called out to Mia. No answer. Just the soft night and those steps. For a second, I wondered if it was her playing around, but that didn't fit. She never goes out alone after dark, and the steps weren't hers. You learn a person's walk when you live with them. These were heavier. I held the knob tight. It pulled back against my hand. Someone had it from the other side. My breath stopped. Then the pull eased and the steps drifted away. All I could think about was Mia inside with the back door unlocked. I called her. I heard her phone ring in the house, then it went to voicemail. I threw the door open and ran. She was at the window trying to see the yard. When she saw me, she ran to the back door, opened it, dragged me in, and locked it again. We didn't need to say it out loud. Someone was out there. She was already on the phone with the police. She told me to get the gun while she pulled the blinds. I went upstairs, grabbed it, came back down. She stood in the living room entry, hand over her mouth, pointing at the window. A man stood on the other side of the glass, both palms pressed flat. A wide grin stretched across his face. I raised the gun. He glanced from the barrel to my eyes and, like it was all a joke, winked. Then he turned and walked away slow, like he knew the yard better than we did. We ran upstairs, shut our bedroom door, and locked it. We sat on the floor and waited. Out there, 45 minutes is a long time. We heard nothing else. By the time the police reached us, he was gone. They searched 2 days. We gave them what we could. Mid-30s, white dark hair, a small cut on his lower lip. The next day, they found a tiny campsite about 90 feet from our house. A little tent, sleeping bag, a few cans, binoculars. They said it looked like he'd been there at least 2 weeks. That close, watching. We moved back to our old rental in town for the rest of the year. We told ourselves we'd come finish the cabin, and we did. It's been 2.5 months with no trouble. Still, the place doesn't feel the same. We keep the blinds down at dusk. We check the yard before stepping out. We sleep, but lighter. People ask what scared me most. It wasn't the grin or even the wink. It was the way he slipped into the dark like it belonged to him, and we were the visitors. We love the mountains, and we always will. But love isn't the same as safety. Out here, someone can live 90 feet from your door for weeks, and you won't know until he wants you to.